Oh, hi there. Hi. Do you mind if I ask you some exit polling questions?
No, that's fine.
Great. Are you male or female? I'm sorry to ask.
Male.
Maybe SNL is the only thing you know about exit polling, and that's a start, but the real primary day in New Hampshire is much colder.
Navigate to 550 Lowell Street, Manchester, New Hampshire.
Driving on snow can be tricky, almost as tricky as projecting the winner of an election.
An important win for Vice President Al Gore. NBC News projects that he wins the 25 electoral votes in the state of Florida. What the networks give us, the networks taketh away. NBC News is now taking Florida out of Vice President Gore's column.
Most college students today won't remember that, the 2000 election. But it was embarrassing for most major news organizations. And it happened because of exit polls. They look like this, but what are exit polls? Why are exit polls important? Well, there are two big reasons.
Generalized now, the new popular vote reporting now 45% of the popular vote is in.
At 7:19 a.m. Eastern Time, Senator Kennedy was elected President of the United States.
So this is the first important thing, election nights, which make exit polls famous, or infamous, as they did in 2004 when early reports suggested America would have a President John Kerry.
It is unbelievable. We thought 2000 would be a once-in-a-lifetime story to cover. You're 2 for 2, Brokaw.
And sure, it is important to know who won, but it's also important to know who voted, who you are. And that's the reason I'm here in Manchester, New Hampshire on primary day. And I understood the idea of an exit poll, but I'd never seen one in action, so I went to find some in New Hampshire's biggest city.
Before we go any further in the story, I should point out that even here in New Hampshire, a state that is really comfortable with media attention on its elections, I can't get too close to the actual exit polling because the whole idea is to get as many people as possible to respond. And if a voter comes out of the polling place and they feel like they're being watched, or certainly if they're on camera, they might be less likely to answer.
But even from a distance, you see the process is really simple. A voter walks out of their polling place, a person with a clipboard asks maybe every other voter, every fifth voter, something like, "Hey, would you take a quick survey?" The voter fills out a short form, and to keep it anonymous, the paper goes in a box, much like an actual ballot.
Never taken an exit poll before?
No, never taken one before.
What was it like?
It's a few questions, didn't take much time.
It was quick, it was easy, just got to be honest and kind of my thoughts on what I'm looking for politically.
She's referencing the other thing about exit polling that's so important, the why. On election nights, we want to know who won ASAP, but it's why they won that's even more enlightening. In 2016, President Trump shocked a lot of people with his win, but why did he win? One specific question from nationwide exit polling might hold the answer. When voters were asked what quality is most important in their candidate, the top answer was a candidate who, quote, can bring needed change. Roughly 4 in 10 people gave that answer, and among that segment, 83% of them voted for Donald Trump. Back to 2020, New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders campaigning on primary day. And how do I get him to talk about exit polls when he wants to talk about basically anything else? Well, like this.
We're going to beat Donald Trump because to defeat him, we're going to have to bring in young people in a way that we have never done before. And by the way, in Iowa, while it is true that the voter turnout was not as high as we had wanted it to be, the voter turnout among young people under 29 years of age increased by 33%.
So he's spinning the numbers a bit, but the bottom line is that he's plugged into exit poll data, especially in a campaign like this.
The music means one thing. It's election night here at NBC News. Good evening. I am Chuck Todd, coming to you live from our Manchester, New Hampshire headquarters. Special coverage here of the 2020 First in the Nation.
So what do you think? Is that pretty cool, seeing behind the scenes of the studio NBC built just for the New Hampshire primary?
Well, here's another look behind the scenes at 30 Rock in New York. Now, this isn't as flashy or as impressive, but what happens down this hallway on election night is critical. In fact, what happens inside this room is so critical that the team in there has to go on an information quarantine. No phones, no internet.
This is the room where we not only analyze the exit poll data on election nights, but kind of where we're standing here. We have a bunch of survey researchers and statisticians who are looking at all of our different models and projecting the races that night.
And with this idea of quarantine, is it really true that like anchors, producers, no one can come in here? Is
That's
that true?
Right. Yeah, we have a red velvet rope line at the door and a security guard there. And
really, a security guard?
Oh yeah, yeah. We don't let anyone come into the room unless they have a specific reason, unless they're working with us that night.
There's obviously a lot of scrutiny on elections and what you do, what NBC News does in calling races. How has your job changed since even 2016?
Yeah, so after 2016, the exit poll specifically, we put in some, we did some fixes, we did some investigation to think about how we could make the instrument better. We now will go to early voting locations in person ahead of election day, and we're conducting exit polls that way so that we get a better sense of everybody, the early voters and then actual election day voters.
It just seems like there's a lot more scrutiny, there's a lot more questions around American elections. I mean, maybe more than ever, is that fair to say?
I think it probably is fair to say, yeah. I mean, there has been a push to kind of talk about the polls and focus on them a little bit more. And the value to an exit poll is this is the only poll in the country where we know for a fact that we are getting voters. And that really is the value of this tool.
What would you say to someone that maybe questions the calls that, let's just say, NBC is going to make on an election night? What is the confidence that the viewer can have?
So we will never make a projection in this room unless these guys are 99.5% confident in that outcome.
That's in part to prevent another oops scenario like in 2000 with Bush-Gore. And since the 2020 election may get more attention than any other election in our nation's history, what will exit polls be able to tell us this year?
I think a big part of what we want to look for this year is enthusiasm. How impactful do people want to be? How important is it to go out to vote? As we're looking through the Democratic primaries this year, we want to know how engaged are people, especially young people. Why are you turning out? What motivates you to be there? And I think it's going to continue to be an important conversation in November when we get to the general election.
And whether it is for the White House, for Congress, or your local city council, there is no poll that is more important than your ballot. So if you need to register to vote or want to check your voter registration, a great place to start is usa.gov.